Now, eating turnips amongst these 7 hills farming isn't where I began, but I firm here, because what of that son of Zeus said, that one day my heirs, who will tend always this altar to the cows, one day they'll inherit the world. But I weren't always a farmer. Once, a while ago now, I was part of a band of robbers, led by Caucus. Caucus, he of the 2 heads, and one head spouted steam, and the other head spouted fire. We lived in a cave under the steepest of those hills, where at the top I've put a shrine to Zeus in thanking for his son. Well, back then we would rob all the lands around, so none was safe. As far as Elba's Longus we would go, and right down to the mountains of the south, coming always back to our 7 steep hills and our cave. And then one time, this man like no other came. He was looking for his cows, he said. He was a strong man, a very strong man. His cows, he said, had been separated because the Queen of Heaven had sent down a gladfly and stung him and panicked him. And he knew some of the herd was here. And we saw him go off south, for he came from the north. And sure enough, tired he were, he came back with full 10 cows. Now, our master, Caucus, said he can't possibly know how many cows he's got, I think. For although he has 10, there are 2 more in the hills over there I have told him to find, and more around. If we bide our time, some of those cows will be ours. And it was true enough. Many of the cows now came down into our bit of land, and the great hero had his work cut out, gathering them until there was a small herd. And marking his time, when Hercules, the hero's name I hear, was sleeping after a particularly difficult chase with the cows and having to build them a pen and all. He was sleeping long and hard. Now, I don't know, but I think Caucus had sent out some of us to set him wine. And in that wine there would be a sleeping draught. Well, anyway, we went out. And Caucus said, take 4 cattle for ourselves, and we will breed them. So, we took out the cattle, and he, thinking I am like Dionysus, had us lead the cattle backwards into the cave and roll the great rock over the cave mouth. But as luck would have it, the rock was stuck that day, for Zeus watches over his son. And his son woke up just as the cows were being led away. For as we led them off, they called to their fellows, and their fellows loudly called back. And the son of Zeus, he had his ear listening for those cows, and he woke, but not quick enough to find the way, but quick enough to scare Caucus. And he called to me, quick, he said, quick, go on the outside of the rock, roll it from the outside. But I'll be left on the outside, I said. I know, said Caucus, you'll either live or you will die, but you no deal of mine. Do as I say. Now, Caucus was a fearful monster. You did what he said, and I thought, all right, and I helped them roll the rock over the cave mouth. And I quaked. I meant to go and hide, but I didn't have time. For the strong hero, leading one of the cows, and listening how it called, and how the cow's weird cart replied, came up the valley fast, and he said, "Where are they?" Now, let this be clear, Caucus was a tyrant. And as the great hero came for my throat, I nodded to the cave behind me. Didn't say anything, that would have been treachery. And the great hero looked, and he saw the cow prints, and he smiled and said, "Dionysus indeed." And then he took me, and he threw me up amongst the rocks, just in case I was going to bother him, but I weren't. And then he lifted up a rock, and he threw it down the valley. And Caucus spewed out fire and steam, but it did no good. For the great hero, with a single blow of his club, struck both heads off. And then all us outlaws, we all pleaded for mercy. And the great hero said, "I have no quarrel with you." And he found it there. And then, under the high cliff, a shrine to cows. And before he went, he told us the story of this quest, which I will tell thee now. How the tyrant of tyrants had made him go to the uttermost west, where there is a land of red, red rocks, to there steal these the cattle of Geryon, master of that wildfire land. Of how he had laboured through Libya to get there. Of how in desperation for the sun in Libya is not bright Apollo who shines upon Greece, but the far fiercer monster Helios. And Helios beat down upon him, and Helios's dogs barked in the sunbeams, and Hercules in the end shot at Helios. And Helios was so impressed by the bow that he lifted up Hercules and put him in the land of the uttermost west. And how he travelled through the red rocks that burnt like flame, and coming at last to the uttermost ocean that beat upon that blind shore that looks nowhere at all, he heard a wild dog barking, and he saw coming towards him a great two-headed hound. And he struck the hound both with a great blow before it could jump at him. This the ski in the Cerberus. And the hound died. But just as he struck the hound, a great bolt came towards him. A great spear thrown, and he only had just had time to roll forward. And there he saw a mighty giant coming towards him. And he got out a sword, and he struck at the giant, and the giant struck back at him. And he buckled under Hercules' second blow, and Hercules rained them down, and for a moment he thought that this was going to be his triumph. For the cattle came surging up then. Well, we had seen them. They were red as blood, red as fire, and they came towards us with their gold eyes. As they came towards him then, and he started to form a great herd. He wasn't sure how many there were, hundreds it seemed. And he was about to lead them off, these, the cattle of Helios, that Geryon once had stolen. When suddenly, behind him, he heard a rumble. And this was a bit of a surprise to the great hero, because he had thought that the giant he already killed had been Geryon, and that his power, Geryon's power, had been a bit exaggerated. But no. What he thought was the mountain slump started to twist and bend and become a great forearm for Geryon to be sleeping. And he stood up, sudden like fate, a three-bodied mighty giant, one hand in a bow, one a sword and one a club, and they all focused on the hero. And the club struck down as the sword lunged forward, as the bow began to shoot. All three blows hit at the same time. But Hercules had just enough warning, and he had jumped nimbly to the left. And as he jumped, he strung an arrow. Now, he was no fool. once he'd strung that arrow, he fired it right in the belly of Geryon, the point that all the heads and torsos met. And it went right into the belly button of Geryon. Now, the poison of the Hydra lies like a curse upon the arrows of Hercules. And the poison entered the mighty giant, and it screamed, and it rained down lava, if it could, upon the hero, for calling upon dark powers. It brought down a storm of fire, but the son of Zeus stood firm, holding up his arm. He shielded himself from the falling flame as Geryon fell into the ocean, became then a mighty set of rocks. But all the cattle were scattered, and Heracles laboured long to bring him back, and slowly began to make his way back east, coming down our peninsula, because his foster mother Hera had not quite forgiven him, and up by the mountains she sent a gladfly down to torment the cattle, and many had been driven north, and many more south. And so he had come our way, and so we had met him on his way around to gather all the cattle to take back to the tyrant of Tyrants. A great man he was. And he forecast that one day, in these 7 great hills, a mighty city would be built, if we kept the altar to Jove up there on the high rocky hill. So I built an altar. And here I live now, no robber anymore, a farmer of turnips and barley and poor grain, for the land here is poor. But I have sons enough to help me, and my wife is a treasure. And so we are, and so we will remain, until we at last come into that fate the son of Zeus foreshadowed for us, masters of the world.